My grandmother slid a $150 million hotel deed across my birthday table. My husband thought he owned it within minutes, but he had 15 minutes before everything he assumed about control fell apart. Imagine a life where your every move is judged, your worth constantly questioned. Now picture a single night, a simple birthday dinner, when a gift appears that shatters the facade and exposes the raw truth of those around you. What would you do if you suddenly held the power to redefine everything? My grandmother slid a hotel deed across the polished table, a document for a property valued at a staggering $150 million. For the first time all night, my husband, Leo, lifted his gaze from his phone. By the time we reached our front door, his mind was already made up. The hotel was his. He had exactly 15 minutes to reconsider his entire future. Earlier that evening, before the appetizers even arrived, my mother-in-law, Serafina, had assessed my appearance. Somewhat presentable, she'd pronounced, in a tone that suggested factual observation rather than genuine compliment. It was the kind of dispassionate assessment one might offer about the weather, delivered with the precise belief that unflinching accuracy was a form of kindness. Her eyes lingered on my navy dress, the one I'd agonized over for 40 minutes because it was Leo's favorite. 3 years of these family dinners had taught me that meticulous preparation was the closest thing I had to armor. Somewhat presentable, a phrase that echoed a clean but undecorated room, or a candidate barely scraping by. Across the table, Leo offered a low chuckle, never once looking up from his screen. This was the scene of my 27th birthday dinner. It was in that very room that my grandmother, Elara Vance, placed a burgundy leather portfolio on the crisp white tablecloth. She then slid it toward me with a calm, deliberate movement, the specific quiet confidence of someone who had waited for this exact moment and prepared for it with the profound patience of an individual who understood that timing was the critical difference between a genuine gift and a devastating weapon. Before I describe its contents, you need to understand the portfolio itself. It was a statement, rich burgundy leather, subtly monogrammed with gold lettering in the corner. Not my initials, which would have been sentimental, but rather the initials of the law firm that had meticulously prepared the documents within, a pragmatic choice, characteristic of Elara, who valued practicality above all else. I opened it to find property deeds, official ownership transfer documents, and a certificate of appraisal dated just 4 days prior. At the top of the cover sheet, in bold, capital letters that my eyes scanned and then immediately reread, demanding confirmation from my brain, was the name, the Vance Grand Hotel. It was appraised last week at $150 million, Elara stated, her voice maintaining its usual texture, warm on the surface, but with an underlying current of steel, like elegant velvet draped over an unyielding foundation. As of 4 o'clock this afternoon, it is entirely yours. A profound silence descended upon the table. I don't mean the polite lull in conversation, I mean the absolute, physical quiet that falls when everyone in a room simultaneously stops what they're doing because something so unexpected has arrived that the space simply doesn't know how to contain it. Serafina's practiced smile, the one she'd worn all evening, a mask of graciousness for an imagined audience, vanished. It didn't fade, it extinguished, all at once, like a blown-out candle flame. Leo finally lowered his phone. For the first time that entire evening, he looked at me. Not at the portfolio, not at Elara, but directly at me, with an intensity of attention I had longed for over 3 years. Yet, in the stark clarity of that restaurant moment, I understood I should never have wanted it. What I saw in his eyes wasn't love, or recognition, or the warm regard of a husband on his wife's birthday. It was pure calculation, the predatory gaze of a hungry wolf eyeing a treasure vault. Let me tell you who I was before I tell you who I became, because this story requires both versions of me. My name is Anya Sterling. I was 27. I grew up in a comfortable Chicago home, not wealthy, but rich with the tangible textures of a life built by diligent people who earned what they had and cherished it accordingly. My mother had been a librarian, my father managed a small packaging company. They both passed away within 14 months of each other when I was 20. That kind of grief strikes before you are fully formed, shaping the person you become rather than the person you thought you'd be. I was raised in part by my grandmother, Elara. Elara Vance is 74, possessing a commanding presence unique to those who have spent decades being underestimated and who, in that underestimation, discovered an incredibly efficient form of freedom. She built the Vance Grand Hotel in 1989, using savings accumulated over 15 years working in real estate management, climbing from a clerical assistant to a regional director. She expanded it, managed it, and molded it into an entity that bore her name and her decisions at every level. She had never married. She had never needed to. In the years after my parents' deaths, she raised me with the specific focus of someone who believes character matters more than circumstance, organizing her mentorship around that conviction. And as I discovered that birthday night, she had also been watching my marriage. I met Leo Sterling at 23, at a benefit for a children's literacy organization where I volunteered. Leo attended because his family were major donors, and his presence was expected. He was undeniably handsome, well-educated, and exuded the kind of magnetic self-assurance belonging to a man who had always been the center of every room he entered, accepting that position as his natural state, not an achievement. We married 11 months later. Elara a 10. Dead the wedding. Her toast was warm, heartfelt, and, I now realize in retrospect, contained a single sentence that, while not warm, was incredibly precise. Anya has always known her own mind. I trust she always will. I had not known my own mind. Not about this. Not yet. Leo's mother, Serafina Sterling, is 61. She's sharp-featured and carries the social authority of a woman whose entire identity is constructed around defining who belongs in which spaces, and who is responsible for guarding those boundaries. She isn't overtly cruel, she's precise, like a surgeon's scalpel. She finds the exact right place to cut, makes the incision cleanly, and expects the resulting wound to be managed quietly. For 3 years, she had been managing me. In the first year, I strove for her approval, a specific mistake I now understand intelligent women make when facing a system designed to perpetually withhold approval, because that withholding drives the effort. The second year, I tried to minimize friction, to be smaller, quieter, to occupy less space, arranging dinners that elicited minimal comment and overseeing a household viewed with the distinct dissatisfaction of someone who finds the decor adequate but uninspired. By the third year, I was simply trying to survive. I arranged flowers, as Leo would later point out at my birthday dinner. I planned menus. I managed the household with the invisible efficiency of someone who had learned that the measure of her success was the disappearance of her labor. 3 years of this. 3 years of, somewhat presentable, Leo's distant chuckle, and a phone more captivating than my face across the dinner table. And then, the burgundy portfolio, and the stark calculation in my husband's eyes. The drive home was silent, frigid, but not merely uncomfortable. It was the specific silence of a car where two people have independently decided that the looming conversation would be better held in a space where the options were clearer. Leo drove. I cradled the portfolio in my lap. Serafina, who had insisted on joining us because she had things to discuss, sat in the back, her posture that of someone carefully organizing her argument. The house. This is the second crucial detail you need to understand before the rest can make sense. The house on Lake Shore wasn't Leo's. I hadn't known this until Elara's attorney had presented the supporting documentation earlier that evening, alongside the hotel deed, which, frankly, was enough information for one night. The house was held in the Vance Family Trust, established by Elara in 2018, and I was its named beneficiary. Leo had never been on the deed. The mortgage Serafina believed Leo was paying, the one she'd twice referred to in 3 years as Julian's home, was a liability attached to a property where his name never appeared. The company, Sterling Global Imports, Leo's firm, his professional identity, the source of the status his family wore like armor, had been capitalized with $4 million from a venture Serafina believed to be an angel investor's contribution. That investor had been a blind trust. The blind trust's sole, irrevocable beneficiary was me. I hadn't known any of this until the attorney laid it all out at the restaurant, in the specific, ordered sequence of a man instructed to present facts in a particular manner for a particular reason. Elara had been constructing a protective framework around me for 3 years. Not to trap me, but to shield me, to ensure that when I was finally ready, when I had seen enough, when the calculation in my husband's eyes was undeniably visible, the ground beneath me would be solid. I walked through the front door of my house at 9:17 p.m. Serafina moved swiftly and purposefully to the wingback chair, claiming her position. She sat, composed herself, and waited until Leo had closed the door behind us and I had placed the portfolio on the entry table, turning to face the room. "Tomorrow at 8, she announced, her voice crisp. "Leo assumes managing director of the hotel. I'll oversee the financial ledgers. The transition begins immediately. We'll want to move quickly before the staff forms any impressions about who is actually in charge." She spoke as she always did, as if her pronouncement were a signed document, and she was simply reading it aloud for the benefit of those who hadn't yet caught up. I looked at her. I thought about, somewhat presentable, about 3 years of condescending chuckles, about the way Leo had finally looked up from his phone. "No," I said. Serafina blinked. It was the first time I had ever witnessed it, the distinct physical reaction of a woman whose meticulously ordered system had no ready response to the word no, especially when it came from a source not meant to produce it. "Excuse me," she inquired, her voice taut. "The hotel belongs to me," I clarified. "Neither of you will step foot on that property." Leo's face flushed crimson. Not with embarrassment, but with the rage of a man whose anger was a primal reflex, who had never been forced to temper it in this specific direction. "You don't know the first thing about running a business," he spat. "You arrange flowers. You plan dinner menus. You have no idea what you're actually dealing with." "Then I'll learn," I replied. Serafina made a sharp, contemptuous exhale of amusement, a sound she had deployed with devastating efficiency over the past 3 years. "Listen to the little housewife. You were born to take care of a home, Anya, not to run an empire. You lack the spine, the background, and frankly, the intelligence." "Serafina," I cut in. "Stop." She stopped. Not because she wanted to, but because my voice held a quality I had never before unleashed, one she hadn't heard in 3 years of dinners, holidays, and household inspections. It was a sound that made her pause, like encountering an unexpected obstacle. Leo slammed his palm onto the glass coffee table, the sharp crack echoing through the room. "Sign management control over to me by tomorrow morning," he demanded. "Or I'm filing for divorce. I will not be humiliated by a woman who has no idea what she's holding. And pack your bags tonight." Serafina snapped, now on her feet, signaling a shift from rehearsed speech to raw emotion. "Get out of my son's house. This is his home. You have no standing here without him." My palms were damp. My heart was not quite hammering, but it was working incredibly hard. Yet my voice, when it emerged, was steady. "You might want to revisit the property records before you finish that sentence," I advised. Just then, the front door opened. Elara walked in, flanked by 2 men in dark suits. She paused in the entry, taking in Leo's crimson face, Serafina's furious stance, and my own position at the center of the room. She threw her head back and laughed. It wasn't the warm, familiar laugh she used at family gatherings. This was a different sound, cold, precise, the laugh of someone who had anticipated this exact scene and found it as instructive as she had expected. "How fascinating," she drawled, moving onto the marble tiles with the unhurried ease of someone who had never needed to rush in her life. "You're attempting to remove the landlord from her own castle." Serafina's jaw dropped. Leo stumbled backward, collapsing onto the sofa. Not from fear, precisely, but from the specific physical response of confronting a situation his ingrained confidence had utterly failed to prepare him for. "This estate belongs to my son," Serafina insisted. "He purchased it. He's been paying the mortgage." The man to Alara's left opened a black briefcase. He carried himself with the bearing of someone who performed this duty regularly, finding the room's drama entirely unremarkable compared to the document in his hand. "I am Arthur Finch," he announced. "Senior partner at Finch, Lynn and Associates. 31 years in property and estate law." He placed a document on the entry table beside the portfolio. "This property is legally titled exclusively in the name of Anya Sterling. The Vance Family Trust has maintained controlling interest since 2018. Furthermore, the entity known as Sterling Global Imports was capitalized with $4 million provided by the Vance Family Trust, and the controlling shares sit in a blind trust, of which Anya Sterling is the sole, irrevocable beneficiary. Any attempt to contest these arrangements would require reversing documents that were prepared, witnessed, and filed before your son's engagement." Serafina clutched the fireplace mantle. "No," she gasped. "No, Leo." Leo was staring at his Italian loafers. This was the profound truth about the Sterling family I had vaguely sensed for 3 years and now fully understood. Their silence was always a confession. Leo had no reputation to protect, because there was nothing to refute. On some level, he must have known, or suspected, choosing not to examine the very foundations of his professional life, because such an investigation might have yielded an inconvenient truth. Some people, after all, prefer a comfortable version of reality. "You have 15 minutes, I stated, my voice steady. "Personal identification, basic clothing, toiletries. Nothing else leaves this house." Leo's eyes widened. The calculation that had been there since the restaurant was gone, replaced by something raw, the specific shock of a man who had spent his entire life in rooms arranged in his favor, only to discover this particular room was not. "Anya, please," he pleaded. "Please be reasonable. We can discuss this." 14 minutes and 40 seconds, I responded. Serafina made a sound like a woman experiencing cardiac distress. She pressed a hand to her chest, her expression twisting into the theatrical configuration of someone feigning a medical emergency. "My heart," she gasped. She sank, rather than fell, with the controlled descent of an experienced actress who knew how to perform without actually hitting the floor hard. She settled onto the Persian rug, one hand on her pearls, eyes half closed, muttering about palpitations. No one moved. Arthur Finch calmly pulled out his phone, displaying the efficient composure of a man prepared for far more contingencies than this room currently presented. "I'll dispatch an ambulance," he offered. "They can be here in 8 minutes. The 15-minute countdown continues. The paramedics can treat you on the sidewalk after the occupancy has been resolved." Serafina cracked one eye open. She looked at Arthur. She looked at Alara, who was observing her with the detached amusement of someone watching a familiar performance. Then she looked at me. With an agility that defied any hint of palpitations, she rose from the Persian rug, exactly what she was, a woman who had never experienced such a thing in her life. The second man in the dark suit, who had yet to speak and who I later learned was a licensed private security contractor, positioned himself near the hall leading to the bedrooms. He wasn't blocking, he was simply present, with the specific quality of presence that subtly communicated that the available options in the room had just been significantly reduced. Leo packed with the furious humiliation of a man simultaneously enraged and shamed. Not methodically, not with the efficiency of someone organizing his situation, but with the frantic urgency of someone desperately trying to manifest control through rapid movement. He grabbed 2 dress shirts, a suit, his toiletry bag, his passport. He stood in the bedroom doorway with a weekend bag barely adequate for a short trip, looking at me with the expression of a man cycling through several potential speeches, unable to settle on one. He delivered none. He simply returned to the entry hall. Serafina had packed with slightly more efficiency. She had a travel bag that seemed to have already been in the guest room, suggesting she had, to some degree, anticipated the evening might take a turn requiring her swift departure. Or perhaps she simply always traveled prepared. With Serafina, preparation was indistinguishable from preemption. At 10:23 p.m., I stood in the doorway of my house and watched them carry two hastily packed suitcases down the front steps toward the hired car Leo had called. Not his car, I noted, confirming that Arthur had also anticipated the question of vehicles. The door clicked shut. Elara appeared beside me. She didn't speak for a moment. We stood in the entry hall of the house that was now entirely mine, enveloped by the quiet that belonged to a space recently cleared of something that had lingered too long. You whispered something at dinner, I said, before you slid the portfolio over. Be careful, my lioness, she replied. This gift is a key to your freedom, and a test to see who bites your hand. She had spoken softly enough that only I had heard it. I hadn't fully understood it then, my attention consumed by the portfolio, the bold name, the impossible number my brain struggled to process. They bit within the hour, I observed. They did, she confirmed, sounding neither surprised nor satisfied. People reveal themselves when resources appear. The only variable is the speed. You knew, I stated. You knew what they would do. I knew what they had been doing, she corrected. For 33 years. I was waiting to see whether you were ready. I looked at her. What made you decide tonight? She was quiet for a moment. The dinner last month, she finally said. Leo's colleague's promotion celebration. You were at the far end of the table, cutting your food into tiny pieces, answering questions not directed at you, making yourself small so no one would have cause to comment. She paused. You had stopped existing in rooms where you were physically present. That is not something I was willing to watch continue. I thought about 3 years of that, of, somewhat presentable, of the chuckle, of the phone. I don't know how to run a hotel, I confessed. You didn't know how to run a household either, she countered. You learned that. That's different. It's exactly the same, she insisted. Both require understanding what a space is for, what it needs, and who the right people are to help you manage it. You have the judgment. You need the knowledge and the staff. She looked at me. I'll give you 6 months before you stop needing me to answer questions. 3, I challenged. She smiled. The true smile, not the public warmth, not the social performance, but the one reserved for the intimate space between us, present since I was 20 years old, when she had arrived with the calm certainty of someone who knew what the situation demanded and had decided to provide it. I want to tell you what came after, because the after is where this story truly lives. The divorce was filed on a Tuesday morning, 14 days after my birthday dinner. Leo retained counsel, 2 attorneys, which I learned from Arthur suggested a contested approach. Then, after Arthur provided a preliminary outline of the asset documentation, Leo retained different counsel. The second attorney was not aggressive. The proceedings took 4 months. I retained Arthur's firm and a family law specialist named Bianca Rossi, 22 years in family and marital property law, who reviewed the trust documents and company records. In our first meeting, she told me, he has no claim to anything structured before the marriage, and the marriage itself produced no joint assets of record. This is as clean as these things get. It was as clean as these things get. I took possession of the Vance Grand Hotel on a Wednesday morning in December, in a formal ceremony requiring approximately 45 minutes of document review and a signature. Elara insisted on taking a photograph with the phone she carried specifically for occasions she intended to remember. The hotel's general manager, Ethan Zhao, had been with Elara for 16 years. On that first day, he looked at me with the specific assessment of someone evaluating whether the new person was worth his full professional effort. In our initial meeting, I asked him to tell me the 3 things he was most concerned about in the hotel's current operational structure. He told me. I asked follow-up questions. He answered them. At the end of the meeting, he said, "You asked better questions than I expected." I had a good teacher, I replied. Ilara had taught me many things over many years. The most important lesson wasn't about the hotel, the house, the trust structure, or any of the material things contained within that burgundy portfolio. It was the truth she had been demonstrating since I was 20. The answer to being underestimated is not to prove yourself to the people who underestimate you. The answer is to build the thing they don't know about, and to be ready when the moment arrives. I hadn't known I was building anything. She had known. That is the difference between someone who merely survives and someone who plans. The hotel had 247 rooms, a ballroom seating 400. And a restaurant on the 41st floor with a breathtaking view of Lake Michigan. I stood at its window on a Thursday evening in January, after the last meeting of the day, and gazed out for a long time. I thought about the night of my birthday, about the burgundy portfolio sliding across the white tablecloth, about Leo's eyes when he looked up from his phone, about Serafina on the Persian rug, pearls in hand, one eye cracking open to evaluate the landscape. I thought about the door clicking shut. The house was mine. The hotel was mine. And for the first time in 3 years, in the specific quiet of a 41st floor restaurant on a January evening, with the city laid out below me like a document I was finally learning to read, so was I.